Good morning, boys and girls. We are going to continue to read the report card by Andrew Clements today. We are reading chapters 5 and 6. So far we know that our main character has a really bad report card, and she has a plan for this. We don't know exactly what that plan is yet, but we're still trying to figure it out. So we ended chapter 4 with lying there in the dark. I faced a fact. I wouldn't know if my plan worked until it did or didn't. So, as I read chapter 5, I want you to go ahead and think about these questions. How did Nora's parents feel about her getting bad grades? And really try to think about what the author said in the chapter, or what the parents said, or what the parents did to prove your answer. And then, how did Nora feel about getting bad grades? So, let's go ahead and read chapter 5. Anne and Todd were still in bed when I walked into the kitchen on Saturday morning. My parents were sitting at the table with their coffee mugs. I could tell they had been waiting for me. I didn't like this part of the plan. This part of the plan was going to be pretty hard on Mom and Dad, and so were some other parts. It really wasn't fair to them, but it couldn't be helped. After all, I wasn't the one who had made up the rules around here. Mom didn't even say good morning. She said, "We opened your grade report last night, Nora." My dad shook his head and growled, "Never seen such bad grades in my life, even on my report cards." I said, "I don't want to talk about it. You saw the grades. I got D's and one C. Those are my grades, and I don't want to talk about it." "Nora, please," Mom said. "There must be a reason you got such awful grades. Are you unhappy? Have the children at school been teasing you? Have you been feeling sick? Or is it something else?" I shook my head as I scanned the row of cereal boxes on the counter. I poured some cornflakes into a bowl and said, "I don't want to talk about it, Mom. I got the grades I got, and that's all there is to it." Dad exploded. "All there is to it? Well, then, you're grounded, young lady, and that's all there is to it. You don't want to spill the beans and let us help you out? Then that's the way it is. You can just sit in your room until you decide to cooperate." I munched my cereal, swallowed, and took a sip of orange juice. I said, "Fine by me." Then I said, "Am I allowed to read, or do I have to sit in the corner and look at the flowers on the wallpaper?" Which was a lot sassier than usual, but that was part of my plan too. Mom put a hand on Dad's arm. She said, "Nora, don't be disrespectful. You know better than that. And you know us better than that too. We only want to help you. But first, you've got to help us." I looked at them, but I don't want any help. Did I ask you to come to school and take my tests for me? Did I ask you to read my assignments for me or do my homework? I don't need help. They didn't talk anymore, and neither did I. After my last spoonful of cereal, I tipped up my bowl and drank the milk. I wiped the milk off my upper lip, laid my napkin on the table, got up, and put my bowl and spoon and glass into the dishwasher. Then I said, "I'll be up in my room." I spent the rest of Saturday reading the article of the history of China in the Britannica. It was a long article, about 500,000 words. I'd been chipping away at it for almost a week, and I was up to AD 1368, the beginning of the Ming Dynasty. It felt good to have some forced reading time. I was allowed out of my room for meals, and on Sunday morning I went to church with everyone, but then it was right back to my cell. At 8 o'clock on Sunday night, my mom came in and sat down on the edge of my bed where I was reading. I knew why she'd come. It was time to get ungrounded. The way I figured, unless you're a teenager with places to go and friends to go with and money to spend when you get there, grounding is pretty pointless punishment. And sure enough, Mom's first words were, "Nora, your father and I have decided that your grounding is over, but I don't want you to think we're not concerned about this. This isn't like you, Nora." I looked up from my book. "Isn't like me? What am I like?" My mom smiled. "Why, you're sweet and thoughtful, and you want to do your very best at everything, Nora. That's what you're like." I gave a little snort, but Mom ignored that noise. And if you need help, she continued, you're smart enough to ask for it. I told you, Mom, I don't need any help. And since when have I been sweet or thoughtful? Mom stayed focused on her main topic. But there's nothing wrong with asking for help. We all need help now and then. Besides, you don't want to get a reputation for not caring about your work. Grades are very important, Nora. So whether you like it or not, first thing tomorrow morning, your father and I are going to the school to talk with Mrs. Haney. It's just not right that a perfectly normal student could be allowed to get all D's and one C, and your father and I did not get a single academic warning letter from the school, not one. The school has some explaining to do. She paused, her eyes searching my face. You understand, don't you, Nora? We're not trying to embarrass you, but we have to get to the bottom of this. I shrugged and said, Sure, I understand. And I did. I had been certain they would visit the school after they saw those grades. Mom stood up and started to leave, but she stopped at the door, turned back, and said, Your dad and I love you, Nora. I looked up and said, I love you too. And that was a fact. But as I lay there on my bed, I wondered if my mom would still be able to say that in a week or two. All right, friends, so chapter 6 is called, it should be Stakeout. Ms. Branch spelled it wrong. Whose fault is it if a child gets a bad grade according to the author in chapter 6? So think about that as I read. And do you agree with them or disagree? And then what important fact did Nora learn in the meeting in Mrs. Haney's class? Chapter 6. So are you grounded like forever? That was Stephen's first question when we met at the bus stop Monday morning. He could have tried to telephone on Saturday or Sunday. He didn't call me very often these days, and it was usually just to ask about homework. No, I said, I'm not grounded. Not anymore, but my mom and dad are going to talk to the principal this morning, so stay tuned. I don't get it, Stephen said. How you got such rotten grades? You never do worse than me. I ignored his bad grammar and shrugged. Well, I did this time. I could tell he had more questions, but Lee and Ben came whooping down the street, and Ben shouted, Hey, Stephen, guess what? I got $40 for my grades, so I got a new Sims game. And it was like I had disappeared. That was another thing about 5th grade. Stephen didn't even try to include me when his guy friends were around. But I didn't make it into a big deal. Besides, I had plenty to think about on the bus ride to school. My first period class was language arts, and every other Monday, Mrs. Noyes took us to the library. Our media center was right across the hall from the main office, so I grabbed a copy of Time magazine and got a chair with a clear view of the entrance hall. I pretended to read, but I was on a stakeout duty. At 9:07, my mom and dad showed up. I saw Mrs. Haney come out of her office and shake hands with each of them. Then they followed her back inside, and her door shut behind them. At 9:14, the intercom in the library chimed, and the school's secretary voice said, Mrs. Noyes, please come to the main office. Mrs. Noyes walked across the hall, and the secretary steered her into the principal's office. At 9:16, Mrs. Noyes hurried out of the office and down the hall toward her classroom. Less than a minute later, she was back, still hurrying, and she had something in her hand. It was her green grade book. I had a pretty good idea of what was going on in the principal's office. At 9:23, my parents left. I ducked behind my magazine in case they looked my way. Then it was all clear. When Mrs. Noyes came back into the library, I kept my eyes on the page in front of me. But I have good peripheral vision. Mrs. Noyes looked right at me. A long, slow look. And then she went to the librarian's office. She shut the door and started talking to Mrs. Brine. When I glanced up a minute later, they were both looking at me. By 4th period math, Mrs. Noyes must have already talked to Mrs. Zhang, because after we went over the homework, Mrs. Zhang looked right at me and said, Nora, are you sure you understand this? And when she assigned our new work, Mrs. Zhang came over and asked me to do 2 problems while she watched. She had never done that before. It was like that all day. All my teachers paid more attention to me, sort of checking up on me all the time, and I understood exactly why. Most kids think that if they get bad grades, it's their problem. But that's not true. The fact is, when a kid gets a bad grade, it's like the teacher is getting a bad grade too, and the principal, and the whole school, and the whole town, and the whole state. And don't forget the parents. A bad grade for a kid is a bad grade for everybody. After school, I hurried to the media center because I wanted to get there before all the computers got reserved. I'd been staying after school for an extended day program since first grade, and I could either go to the gym or to the library. I almost always went to the library. Stephen did the extended day program too because both his parents worked, same as mine, but he only went to the library once in a while. No one was using my favorite computer over in the corner, so I sat down and punched in my password. When the system recognized me, I opened up the internet browser, went to Google, and typed in Connecticut Mastery Testing. There was a ton of web pages, and I found my favorite one. It listed 9 ways the state should improve the CMT. I'd been online for about 3 minutes when Mrs. Brine came walking toward me, so I switched screens to the kids' page about ocean currents. I didn't want her to know the kind of research I was doing. Mrs. Brine smiled and said, "Nora, I just got a call from Mrs. Haney. She'd like to talk with you in her office." "Now?" I asked. "Today?" She nodded. "That's what she said. I'll walk you over, okay?" I said, Sure. Can I leave my things here or should I bring them?" "Better bring them," she said, "just to be sure they're safe." I grabbed my book bag and my jacket. My mind was zooming along at 1,000,000 miles an hour. This little talk with Mrs. Haney wasn't in my plan. But so what, I said to myself. You knew something like this would happen sooner or later, right? So what if it's a whole lot sooner? No big deal. By the time we walked to the principal's office, I had calmed myself down. No big deal, I told myself. Again. Then the door opened. Wrong. It was a big deal. A very big deal. My mom and dad were sitting at a large, round conference table, and Mrs. Noyes and Mrs. Zhang and Mrs. Card, the music teacher, and Mrs. Prill, the art teacher, and Mr. McKay, the gym teacher, and Dr. Trindle, the guidance counsel. Mrs. Brine followed me in and took a seat next to Mrs. Noyes. And there they sat, all my teachers, and my parents, and the guidance counselor, and the principal. Mrs. Haney stood up, and she smiled and nodded at me. I must have had an awful look on my face because she said, "Please don't be scared, Nora. This is a very friendly little group. When your parents stopped in this morning, I decided it would be a good idea for all of us to get together and talk about your report card. Sorry to surprise you, but we didn't want you to worry about it all day. Because honestly, there's absolutely nothing to worry about. Please take the seat there between your mom and dad. And remember, we're all here because we care about you." Everyone was smiling and nodding at me as I sat down. I learned an important fact at that moment. Just because I'm really smart doesn't mean that I can't have a good old-fashioned panic attack. All right, friends, that's the end of chapter 6. I will see you guys later. Bye.